Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a first-time guest today. Claudia Tornquist is the president, CEO, and director of Kodiak Copper. She joins us this Thursday, April 8th, 2021. Claudia, thank you for coming on this first time.
Thank you for having me, Danica. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're glad for your presence. We're always delighted when industry insiders will join us to give us their expert insight and awareness of what's going on in real things including all natural resources, but particularly metals. Our audience has been keenly interested in monetary metals like gold, silver, platinum, palladium. And as we've discussed those topics with such people as Keith Neumeyer, Rick Rule, and so on, they've often mentioned the importance of other minerals that are mined at the same time or sometimes in the same operations with some of those monetary metals. And especially as we talk about the economic environment within which we're currently living, which has certainly been unusual over the past period of time, copper keeps coming up. And we've talked with Pamela and Marianne Aden about, they call Dr. Copper, meaning, such a reliable and trusted indicator of a trend, major trends, mega trends, they say, in the overall industrial economy and metals in specific, and as well as other natural resources. So we're glad for your presence here. I wanted to let our audience know that you are, in addition to being president and CEO and director of Kodiak Copper, formerly manager at Rio Tinto, working with Rio Tinto copper and diamond operations, also that you held a position of executive vice president of business development for the streaming company Sandstorm Gold. We have interviewed Sandstorm Gold executives here multiple times, and Rick Rule has given us his glowing appraisal of their promise. And that you are also director of Silver One Resources and former director of Kennedy Diamonds, and that you led the $176 million sale of the company to Mountain Province as a chair of the special committee of the board. So you really have quite a variety of involvement in different precious metals and mineral operations, as well as a business focus that you bring. So we'll be interested to hear more about that and your perspectives on some broader metals and economy questions that our viewers have submitted. If we could start off by talking about why copper is so important. It keeps being brought up. As I mentioned, Rick Rule and Keith Neumeyer brought it up when we were talking about a massive metals shortage coming, which they talked about. They said that not only is copper going to be in tremendous demand in the near future for home construction with pipes and that sort of thing, but also electric vehicles and so on. So, but why is copper traditionally viewed as such an important indicator? How did it get the nickname Dr. Copper as something that's going to inform you about what's really going on?
Well, copper is by a margin the largest base metals market, and as you say, has uses in construction, electrification. It's really the backbone of the economy. Copper is in just about everything. And with the trends we are seeing, in particularly green energy, electrification, all those are very copper-intensive industries. So there's a big demand for copper coming in the coming years and not much supply to meet it. So it's really quite an exceptional situation.
So that's again with their massive shortage. It was Keith Neumeyer here was saying that he thinks that the policy changes, there's organic economic factors in any economy. There's going to be times of expansion or contraction, but when you combine that with policy changes at the same time from governments saying we're going to go in a direction of like a green New Deal initiative, that sort of thing, where we want all electric vehicles or solar or whatever. How does that combination, are we entering sort of this perfect storm where we're going to see that alignment of what would have naturally been happening by market forces combined with policy changes? And then what is the reality of the mining industry to be able to meet that increased demand that fast?
You put it well. It's both. Certainly there's a lot of market forces and a lot of government stimulus, etc. as well, combining for a perfect storm. It's really quite incredible. Rio Tinto's CEO said it best. He came out with a statement that in the next 25 years, the world will consume more copper than in the last 500. I thought that was really quite an astonishing statement to enable any plausible growth in green energy and electrification. So yeah, there's no doubt a lot of copper will be needed. And it's quite stark if you look at the opposite side of the coin, the supply side, because there's simply not very much in the pipeline. In the last 10 years, there was an all-time low in copper discoveries, only 4 major discoveries. That's less than what was discovered in 1 year alone in the 90s, in 1991, which was a good year for copper discovery. So the pipeline of projects to fill this future demand is at an all-time low. And there's still 2-3 years of production coming on from mines that have just gone into production, are ramping up. But after 23 or so, which many analysts see as peak copper, the supply will decline, and there are no new projects in the pipeline to fill that gap.
That's concerning, because the impression I got when talking with Keith Neumeyer is that there's this basically factual or reality disconnect. A lot of people would say there's a lot of reality disconnect between our policymakers versus Main Street. But in this case, we're talking about physical reality of what's in the ground, what's happening on the ground, and what we're able to actually do to respond as an industry to the demand, the need, versus sort of these maybe ivory tower policy decisions that are made that says we should go in this direction and we should have this goal met by this year. We'll talk again, I guess, in a few minutes, we'll talk about some extra efforts that the industry is making, and maybe Kodiak in particular, to try to scale up to meet that demand. But it sounds like the environment, the backdrop that we're looking at is basically, you could call it unlimited demand compared to the constraints on the supply for the foreseeable time frame. We have a very specific question about that from a viewer. Jorge Cardoso says, what is the projected worldwide supply and demand of copper for 2021, 22, 23?
Well, the current market size of copper is sort of in the 23, 24 million tons a year. And as I said, 2023 will be peak copper, and we'll see a decline from then. We know that already because simply copper mines are big mines in general that take a long time to build and develop, and what's not being developed and built now will simply not be there. So we know we'll see a decline, and at the end of the day, something will have to give. More copper will have to be found, and that's also what Kodiak, the business we're in.
Okay. That's an interesting question, because the other balancing factor that comes out often in our discussions is that you can't ask that question in isolation. Like when you talk about peak anything, there's always the other part of the equation is at what price? Because if the price were to move because of the demand completely outstripping the supply, that changes the whole equation. So that's a question from Peter Frovine, who says, where does she see the price of copper in 12 months and 24 months? We always give a disclaimer to our audience that we're not giving direct personal financial advice here, but what factors are driving that, and what projections do you think are reasonable to expect?
That's a good question and a difficult question, of course. Copper certainly has been on a tear from just around the $2 low about a year ago. We are now at over $4 and have just recently hit a 9-year high. So certainly a very positive development. I have no doubt that in the long term we'll see higher copper prices. And where exactly we'll be in 12, 24 months, that's always very difficult to say. I'm sure it will be ups and downs, but the trend in the long term is, in my mind, there's no doubt up. And I find it quite astonishing, the forecasts that some of the industry participants come out with. BHP recently came out with a copper price forecast of $5 per pound. BHP, the largest mining company in the world. And then Trafigura also just recently, their forecast is $6.80 per pound in the long term for copper. And Trafigura, they're one of the largest commodity traders, and they are on the pulse of the market like barely anyone else. And so that's really speaks to the optimism, the general optimism in the market. And in my mind, there's no doubt we will see a sustained period of high copper prices.
You made me, I'm smiling at myself because my son, who was fascinated with coins, currency, and money, he's actually the one who got me into this podcasting about metals and so on years ago. Over a decade ago, he had a hobby of going through pennies, U.S. pennies he would get from the bank in large quantities and sorting out to find the copper ones. And the other ones he would just return back to the bank. And they got to know him as the kid who came in every Monday with his big rubber bin of unsorted or sorted pennies to return, and he wanted to get their ones. So after all that, he moved out, went after college and so on. And I was stuck with this bin he left of 70 pounds of copper pennies. And I called a local coin shop. This was a couple of years ago. And you mentioned that was when the price was down. And I said, are you guys buying these? They said, no, there's no market for that. Just turn them back into the bank. So I took them back into the bank and just dumped them all back into the system. So 70 pounds of copper pennies gone. And now who knew, So, yeah. But people who are contrarians do look for these value cycles, and they get excited when things are displaced and far from the equilibrium points. And they look for the future, not for just what the recent trend has been. Susan Liang, again, we don't give personalized financial advice, but asks the fair question: should we buy copper? So if you're a investor and you're looking at natural resource investments, do you think this is a time people should at least be taking a close look at copper itself?
Well, there's certainly copper ETFs, for example, around, and investor interest in them is increasing. Alternatively, of course, there are the mining companies or exploration companies in the copper sector that also give exposure to the copper price in the long term.
So let's turn to the new Green New Deal, the new environment. We've talked about the environment we've come through. Looking forward, what's the fundamental value proposition for copper that you think will be evolving in the new green economy?
Well, copper, just for its physical properties, is best suited to many electrical applications, whether that's electrical cars, whether that's charging infrastructure, whether that's wind, solar generation. Everything that's green has a lot of copper in it. And there are really no alternatives to using copper. It's the metal that fits best and works. So, with the growth of these green technologies, that will just also trigger a lot of growth in copper, because all these technologies, whether it's wind, solar, electrical cars, they are all much more copper intensive than the technologies they replace. An electrical car, for example, has 3 to 5 times as much copper as a internal combustion engine car, and it's very much the same story with other green technologies.
My mind is just swirling with a couple of things you just mentioned and other experiences we've had. Our channel, we also have interviewed medical doctors about advances in people being able to take more responsibility for their wellness and their independence. We had Dr. Jay Nielsen, MD, talking about endocrine disruptors, that a lot of our modern ailments, both men and women, are suffering is because of overexposure to plastics in our environment. And plastic tubing and piping in houses for water, for domestic water supply, have become all the rage in the past 5 to 10 years because it's so cheap, it's so quick and easy to install. And there was also experimentation with different materials for piping in water supply in homes. But copper piping has been like the gold standard for domestic water supplies for the last 50 years or so. And I'm wondering, with this new renewed interest in reducing exposure to plastics and endocrine disruptors and so on, if we're going to end up with a resurgence of copper. And then also, when I was in my former life as an industrial manufacturing engineer at a Fortune 100 company manufacturing in Detroit, Michigan, we lost our connection we were upgrading all their computer systems. We lost our connection to the main data center, and we thought maybe it was something we had done because we were upgrading all their computer systems. But no, in fact, we found out all of their communications were down because 3 miles overnight of copper communication cable had been stolen by people down the telephone poles down the street, and it mysteriously disappeared. No doubt it ended up in some smelter's scrap pile. But as the economy changes, there's remarkable interest in copper as the ideal solution to many problems. We have a question, though. It's ironic. You mentioned the Green New Economy is going to take a lot of copper. Copper comes from mining, so you have the same green advocates who are saying we should stop polluting with fossil fuel cars, that sort of thing. We should get into electric economy. So let's go electric. Electric is good. The old petroleum is bad, whatever. But that means mining for those like copper. And then they say, well, mining's a dirty industry or whatever. So this whole idea of ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria, has become quite prominent in the popular discussion. So how does that affect the copper mining industry, and what strides perhaps is Kodiak taking to help contribute to the advancement of environmental, social, and governance criteria as good stewards of the future economy?
That's a very good question. And the world has certainly changed a lot when it comes to ESG over the last years and decades. In the olden days, companies used to just go build a mine wherever they found a deposit with not very much consideration for local stakeholders, environment, etc. But these days are well and truly over. There are a number of mining projects that were held up or even didn't come to fruition because of local opposition. And companies now understand that they have to earn the license to operate. And ESG considerations, whether that's safety, whether that's environment, whether that's local stakeholders, First Nations, are very, very important, even at a very early stage already. Kodiak is an exploration company, and we've only drilled a couple of holes, but ESG for us is already very important, and we are doing all different initiatives, whether it's working with First Nations for heritage surveys, looking at the areas where we work to make sure there are no heritage sites or any implications on their interests, whether that's working with environmental consultants to gather baseline data. So all these areas are crucially important, and we are very much aware that you have to do things right to earn your license to operate and build a mine.
Now, you mentioned a couple of times earlier that it's going to be a big challenge for the copper industry to meet the demand for copper by the new economy. So you said that Kodiak is contributing to that as an exploration company. How so? What unique value proposition does Kodiak bring? What maybe track record of approach or strategy are you already showing, and where do you think that's going to lead for Kodiak being able to make its mark in being able to help the world expand its copper discovery and development of resources that's going to help meet that need?
Well, Kodiak is an exploration company focused on copper porphyry projects in North America. And our main project is in southern BC in Canada called MPD. And we were fortunate to make a significant discovery there last year, which was a real game changer for our company, enabled us to raise $12.7 million, and has now set us up to drill a much larger drill program. And we have 30,000 meters planned this year on that project to follow up on our initial discovery and build on it. And will be a very exciting year for our company to discover more copper and follow up on our initial discovery success.
We always talk with companies that we speak with about the jurisdictions in which they operate, and that's part of the environment too. We've talked about the economic environment, we've talked about the technological environment. How about the political and regulatory environment? You mentioned southern British Columbia. Why is that an ideal location for you to be exploring? Besides the geological reasons, but you can explain that as well.
Well, we are with MPD in southern British Columbia. It's a very established mining area. That, of course, is a great advantage, very cost-effective exploration. Everything's there that you need for an exploration project, and it has fantastic infrastructure. And also from an ESG standpoint, very good in that we have electrical power in British Columbia. 98% of that is from renewable sources. We have plenty of water. Many other copper projects are in the high Andes, in very water-scarce area. So really great infrastructure, and that makes it a great place to operate.
From a regulatory standpoint, is it friendly for your operations as well?
Well, BC is a very established has an established mining industry and hence an established regulatory environment, it can be sometimes bureaucratic and can sometimes take longer because you have to go through all the right steps. But if you do it right, then you get your permits and you can work very well with the regulators and the First Nations in the area.
You've talked about some of the factors, but what about the people within the company, the leadership? Whenever we speak with Rick Rule, and the reason that we're talking to Kodiak is because it was one of the invitees as part of Discovery Group to the Sprott Natural Resources Symposium last year. Rick Rule is very careful about the analysis that he does to select only what he considers the most promising companies to participate in those symposia. And one of the things he talks with us about is that he tends to favor. He says he needs a lot of luck in the mining exploration business. And he says, but you'll find out that some people are serially lucky because they do the right things, they do them over and over. So he talks about sort of these people who are consistently doing the right things, putting themselves in the right place, making the right decisions. What about the leadership team at Kodiak? What do people need to be aware of about their capabilities and their track record?
I think you put it very well with the luck and the serial luck. And in Kodiak's case, whom I definitely would like to highlight is our founder and chairman, Chris Taylor, who is a very smart, out-of-the-box thinking geologist. Most of your audience will know Chris from our sister company, Great Bear, that he also founded, and where he looked at a project that many people had looked at, many other geologists had looked at and didn't see anything in it. And Chris took a different view, a different interpretation, and made it one of the largest discovery successes in recent years. And very much the same is what he has done with Kodiak's NPD project, which is also a project that has been explored for 50 years. By a variety of different people, different times, different smaller land packages. And when Chris looked at it, he just took a different interpretation. Everybody else had drilled shallow, and he said, look, nobody has drilled deep enough to really tap the potential of what we have here. So we took a different approach, drilled deeper, and were successful right off the bat. So, yeah. Having a smart, out-of-the-box thinking geological mind is key to your success in mining and to having luck several times, luck in a row. And Chris certainly is key to our success, and I feel very fortunate to have him as the chairman and leading our technical work.
You mentioned to me before we started the interview that your advanced involvement and training is primarily in the business area. So Can you talk to us for a few moments about Kodiak's posture with the business value proposition that Kodiak represents, and what, without divulging anything that you can't, what maybe you see as potentially some of the promise that lies within the direction or the strategy that, from a business standpoint, that Kodiak has going forward?
That's an interesting question. My background, as you said, is mostly sort of business, financial, commercial. And I worked for many years, almost 10 years for Rio Tinto, business development, M&A, business evaluation. And heading up a copper company, copper porphyry company, if you look around the world, copper porphyries are large projects, and the mines are generally operated by the BHPs, Antofagastas, Teck's of this world. So looking out into the future, what is a likely outcome for our shareholders is that at some point a major will become interested in the company. We have, of course, already Teck as a major shareholder. They invested $8 million in Kodiak after our initial discovery holes last year. And our job, my job, is to create lots of value at the drill bit for our shareholders to be then in a position to really create value as and when a big suitor becomes interested in our company.
one thing that just came to mind as you were discussing that is we've talked with a lot of, for example, silver miners who've talked about Mother Nature often places different mineral deposits close together. Sometimes you'll get silver from a copper mine or copper from a silver mine, even though that might not have been the main thing you're going after. We've been interviewing probably 3 times a week for the past quarter with people who are talking about this physical silver shortage, silver squeeze on different commercial exchanges and so on. If, in fact, we see what some are expecting to be this rapid rise in silver price due to a physical shortfall in the silver area, primarily driven by investment demand, retail investment demand, if that were to drive silver prices higher and change the equation, as we've talked about before, the business profit equation for silver mining companies, is it possible that, like you mentioned, there haven't been any major copper discoveries recently, or not many, but would rising silver prices, for example, likely increase silver mining activity and thereby consequentially increase copper mining activity alongside from some of those major players as well?
Good question. Well, there's certainly in many copper projects silver as a byproduct. I would say the strongest driver for the copper mining industry is certainly the copper fundamentals, the green energy, electrifications, and all those good things we talked about before.
Mm-hmm. Well, if people want to find out more about the insights that they can about the value proposition of copper in general or Kodiak in particular, where can they find out more?
Well, our website is kodiakcoppercorp.com. And you find our contact details there and our email and phone details. And of course, we're always there to answer any questions you might have. Don't hesitate to get in touch.
Well, thank you very much. We've been speaking with Claudia Tornquist. She is the president, CEO, and director of Kodiak Copper. And we're just delighted for your first-time visit here, Claudia. We hope we get a chance to welcome you again. And just on behalf of all of our viewers, thank you for joining us on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you very much.